So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. This painting, entitled October, is by Jules Bastien Lepage from 1878 and is an example of an art form called realism. The details are crystal clear, as if this was a photograph. I mean, look at the tendons and the skin tone of this woman's hands. But realism in art means more than just accurate depiction. Notice there are no cherubs hovering in the clouds. There are no satyrs or centaurs romping on the hillside. These women are miles away from the court of Versailles. Realism had a commitment to depict the mundane. It is October in France, and the potatoes are ready for harvest. And these women are the ones who have to harvest them, lest the village starve over the winter. If the harvest had been poor and the women emaciated, then Bastien Lepage would have painted that instead. Realists have a fierce commitment to reality, even if it is ugly. My name is Lowell Bliss. Welcome to episode 50 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. In his book, Hope in Time of Abandonment, Jacques Ellul argues that realism is an intellectual attitude in which hope is expressed and in which it rests. Along with the spiritual attitude of prayer and the psychic attitude of waiting, realism forms a threefold decision. For all the talk of muses and inspiration, an artist like Jules Bastien Lepage still had a decision to make when he took up his paintbrush. Will I paint like a romanticist or like a realist? The leading figure in the art world's realist movement was another artist, Gustave Courbet. This is his 1849 painting, The Stonebreakers. Earlier painters may or may not have taken up these peasants as a subject matter, but if they had, they would have likely pursued the bucolic ideal, corrected the imperfections like the ripped clothing or softened the landscape. One art critic, Kate Shearer, makes these four observations about the Stonebreakers. Quote, Courbet uses earth tones and quick brushstrokes to convey the poverty of the men. The viewer can't fully see their faces, showing a lack of individuality. Lack of aerial perspective shows hopelessness. Movement creates a circle on the canvas, showing the cycle of life. Unquote. Realists are not afraid of hopelessness. As we've seen, neither is Jacques Ellul. The person who wants to live in hope must decide to be a realist. Realism, Ellul claims, is, quote, linked with hope indissolubly. Realism is characteristic of the pessimism of hope in the exact degree we have seen. This hope never consists in thinking that things will work out, unquote. That, it seems to me, is Ellul's statement about realism that we should lock onto, even as a definition. This hope never consists in thinking that things will work out. But let's not approach all of this directly. I'll use this episode to help prepare ourselves to consider Ellul's views on realism. We'll approach Ellul through what we have already heard from Wendell Berry and Walter Brueggemann and now Gustave Courbet, and then from something new, courtesy of the Kansas Leadership Center. I think we can generally agree that it is easier to live surrounded by optimists than by pessimists. However, there may be somebody harder to tolerate than a hardcore pessimist, and that is the pessimist who goes around saying, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. In episode number 3, I told the story of when Wes Jackson was complaining to his friend Wendell Berry about a professor who insisted on calling himself a hard-headed realist. Berry responded, well, Wes, A hard-headed realist is usually someone who uses a lot less information than what is available. In the end, I don't think that Berry was making an argument against realism as much as he was against being hard-headed in our realism. If you're going to be a realist, then be real about all the information that is available to you. For example, consider Walter Brueggemann's fivefold paradigm about history makers, people who don't just let history happen, but who cooperate with God in actually making history. History makers have number one, a profound sense of anguish, pathos, and incongruity that touches them personally. For this point, Berry and Ellul would argue, be a realist. Don't hold the pain and suffering of this world at bay. Don't be afraid to let it touch you personally. Treat the harsh realities of this world as realities, regardless of their harshness. And once you are touched, then treat your own emotions as real too. This is contrary to our training. As my wife Robin taught us when she joined us in episodes 9 and 10. Remember what Brueggemann has also taught. When we humans encounter a harsh reality, our natural response is denial. Speaking the truth confronts denial, but helping people grieve dissipates denial. If we ever hope to be people who hope, then we have to embrace our emotions. Treat them as real. That was only point one, but an important point. Secondly, Brueggemann says that the history maker has confidence in the moral coherence of the world. Here Berry would say, don't be hard-headed. The moral coherence of the world is information that we can avail ourselves to. The same is true of number 3, an assertion of the raw sovereignty of God in the historical process. We have this information available to us in the scriptures and the stories of the saints who have gone before us, in our own histories and in the assurances of the Holy Spirit. God is still on the throne, so don't be hard-headed about your realism. Point 4. History makers have a capacity for discerning social analysis and criticism. This, along with the first point about our emotions, may be the best statement about realism. Engage our current social circumstances with a fierce commitment to photographic accuracy. Paint what you see, not what you want to see. Paint the real, not the ideal. Don't cover up what you consider to be torn, ripped, or ugly. Don't add things that aren't there. Now, anyone can do social analysis and criticism, and hard-headed realists consider themselves quite adept at it. But Brueggemann is only interested in social analysis and criticism, which is discerning. For example, let's say that Gustave Colbert employed an assistant to carry his easel and his canvases. This assistant would have observed the exact same scene, the two stonebreakers working on a hillside. Same scene as Colbert did. This assistant may have had enough experience with his master to see the ripped clothing and the harsh landscape with his own photoreceptors, and likely knew that Colbert would not shy away from painting them. In other words, the assistant may have been an adept observer. But Colbert takes it the next step. He is also an interpreter, something that a trained art critic like Kate Shearer can explain to us. Colbert discerns poverty, loss of individuality, the unending cycle of life, hopelessness. Robin and I teach leadership seminars based on the framework of the Kansas Leadership Center. People come into the seminar already convinced about one of the leadership competencies, that effective leaders should know how to intervene skillfully. In fact, they often assume that it is the essence of leadership, to act, get her done, take that hill, charge. But to intervene skillfully is only one of the competencies, and it's not where you start. KLC employs the Observation, Interpretation, and Intervention Circle, or the OII Circle, to explain things. Skillful interventions begin in accurate observations. We employ our 5 senses, to identify what is really there. We identify behaviors, relationships, and patterns. But then we need to make sense of what we observe. We need to interpret it. We need to engage in social analysis and criticism. That's Brueggemann's term, in the same way that Kate Shearer, same way she is a critic. Art critics, like drama critics in the newspapers or like literary critics in the universities, aren't necessarily criticizers. They are interpreters. They make sense of what any and all of us have just seen. However, even here in the OII circle, there's no guarantee that the critic will be discerning. KLC encourages leaders to test multiple interpretations and points of view and to explore tough interpretations. They call this the interpretive mind shift. Most of us like to take our observations and make technical interpretations about them. We like to believe that there is a technical fix for a particular problem. We just need to find an expert or throw enough money at a problem and it will be fixed and quickly. Discerning interpreters, however, accept the fact that most of life's big problems are what we call adaptive challenges. Problems that are going to require multiple stakeholders who are going to have to learn and change over the long haul. Adaptive challenges can't be fixed, but you can make progress on them. Similarly, we gravitate toward benign interpretations of our situations. We are habituated to think the best of other people and of ourselves. Generally, this is an admirable quality, but it can be an idealism that blinds us to reality. Realism considers conflictual interpretations as well. No, Prime Minister Chamberlain, Herr Hitler is not simply interested in securing his own borders. Your agreement in Berlin is not peace in our time. Winston is right. Hitler is evil. That's one interpretation. And he's ready to burn down all of Europe, including your own vulnerable island. The final mind shift is from individual interpretations to systemic ones. Individual interpretations look for individual scapegoats. They say, if only we fire this current CEO and hire a new one, things will improve. If only we replace the Republicans with the Democrats, then Congress will begin to govern again. Systemic interpretations are open to the possibility that something is wrong with the system. And that doesn't make any difference who you put in that position. The outcome will be the same, the problem unsolved. This is a long episode, so let me summarize. Ellul argues that hope is indissoluble from realism. No realism, no hope. The opposite of realism is idealism. We don't see what is really there. Instead, we see what we wish was there, what would be there if we lived in an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world, and no amount of colorful brushstrokes can paint over it. Realists who end up at hope see the incongruity, anguish, and pathos in this world, and are not afraid to let it touch them personally. They accept that their emotions are real. They apply realism to their interpretations of the world when they are trying to make sense of it. Consequently, they don't remain stuck in technical, benign, individual interpretations, the quick, the nice, the scapegoating solutions. Instead, they explore tough interpretations, adaptive ones, conflictual ones, systemic ones. They are discerning in their social analysis and critique. We've not yet mentioned Brueggemann's fifth and remaining characteristic of history makers. It's the one from which we derive this series' definition of hope. Remember that history makers are not hard-headed in their realism. They avail themselves to the information that there is a moral coherence to this universe, and that God exercises raw sovereignty over history. Consequently, number 5, history makers have a bold conviction about an alternative possibility that goes under the name of hope. We'll take another episode, the next one, about realism, largely because we really didn't cover much about Ellul's specific teaching on it. But hopefully we are in a better headspace about what Ellul might be saying when he says, quote, "Hope never consists in thinking that things will work out," unquote. I'm Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.